next door, right next door, right?
Okay, go ahead and open up this spreadsheet, and we'll get started. We've got about a minute. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Is this similar to what Professor Hogan is going to be teaching us?
It's different because Argus has its own sort of version of this.
Oh, but it's the same kind of analysis.
Yes.
I haven't done it. I gotta check. I gotta get on it.
Okay, I have 8 o'clock precisely, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so what this is a sort of a canned spreadsheet that the CCIM Institute puts out, and it allows you to go through and do a variety of different types of investment analysis on a before-tax and after-tax basis. Now, the way this is sort of just a kind of almost like a black box sort of situation. You simply put in the numbers, it spits out the output, okay? Now, what we're going to do is just kind of work through just kind of a couple of little sort of sample examples just to get you sort of acquainted with what it will do. It's a great way, in many cases, to sort of double check your work on different kinds of assignments, or specifically quizzes, or your own analysis for an actual project. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through and kind of show you how to use this, and then in one of the future class sessions, we're going to kind of construct one on our own, okay? So that we kind of get away from the black box aspect of it, and then force you to actually have to construct one that will do a lot of the same features this one will do, but not quite as advanced. Okay, so you can go ahead if you want to fill in any of this stuff up at the top. It really doesn't matter. This is just simply, kind of basic information about what project it is you're doing, your name, and that sort of thing. Okay, so the first piece of information that it asks for is the size of the project, okay? And you've got a couple of choices here. As you see, they say you can either put it in as the number of square feet of the project or the number of units, okay? So if you're dealing with, let's say, a shopping center or an office building, you're probably going to put in the square footage, the leasable square footage. If you are doing it from like a hotel or for an apartment complex, you may want to do it on a per unit basis, okay? That's up to you. You could still do an apartment community based on total square footage as well if you've got a lease rate that's going to apply to a per square footage amount, okay? So in this case, let's just say that we're going to do 100 units. We're going to do an apartment community, all right? Then, what it asks for are 3 pieces of information about the property. Specifically, it's going to ask for the assessed or appraised value of the land, assessed or appraised value of the improvements, and assessed appraised value of the personal property, okay? So, let's sort of start with the personal property. This one we can ignore, okay? The personal property for a commercial piece of real estate, this is going to be things like furniture, things like equipment, things that are basically non-real estate assets.
Trade assets.
Right, that may apply to the property. So in virtually none of our analyses are you ever going to use that, okay? This only comes into play whenever you do have an office building and you've got it fully furnished with tons of equipment and desks and that sort of thing, and you as the owner own all of that, and you may have to pay business personal property taxes, okay? But for our purposes and our analysis, we're not worried about that. We are worried about the land value and the improvements value. But before we pop in those amounts, we've got a couple of different options over here. If you look at the little menu that should pull up here, okay? And we've got 3 different choices as to how we come up with this number. Whether we come up with it as a percentage of the acquisition basis, we come up with it as an assessed dollar amount, or an actual dollar amount.
How come I'm not getting no drop
Yeah,
down?
how do you get that?
Once again, you should just
y'all got to enable your macros.
make sure you enable the macros. Up top of the spreadsheet, it probably says enable macros or disable macros whenever you opened up the spreadsheet.
I downloaded it, but
Okay, now, so you should have 3 different options there, as I said. So this first one, percentage of acquisition basis. So what this boils down to, this is what I was talking about last week in terms of from a tax perspective. You had a couple of different options as to how do you come up with the valuation for the land for the purposes of income tax valuation. And we said that you basically had a couple of different options. One of those was to simply say that we are going to allocate the land value as a percentage of the purchase price. And I think we said like, maybe 20 or 25% of the property's purchase price would be allocated to the land value, and then the remaining amount would be allocated to improvements. So that's how we would allocate it based upon the acquisition. We could also simply allocate it based upon the tax assessor's office, okay? So we go and we look up the property, and assuming the property is fully constructed, fully built out, it's going to show us on the tax roll specifically the dollar amount and the percentage amount allocated to land, allocated to improvements, okay? You pull up any property on the tax rolls, and it's going to show you that information, all right? And so we could potentially use that. And then the third approach that it allows you to use is simply an actual dollar amount. And we said this might come from an appraisal, could be that you maybe bought the land outright and then you ultimately built the building on top of it. And if that's the case, you could use the actual dollar amount of the land acquisition and then the actual dollar amount for the construction cost for the actual improvements, okay? So at least those three different methods to come up with what that value is going to be, all right? So in this case, we're going to do it as a percentage of the acquisition basis in both instances, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, the land value is worth 20%, and I'm going to say the improvements value is 80%, all right? And then we're not going to put anything in there for that personal property. We said we're not going to bother with that, okay? Then this next little menu here, it says useful life of the improvements in terms of years. And it gives you two choices, residential and non-residential. Okay, if you remember, last week we said that for residential property, you get how many years of depreciation? 27 and a half. Okay, so if we select the residential option, boom, it magically puts in there the 27 and a half years. Okay, if you selected the non-residential or commercial option, it would have popped in 39. Okay, now the useful life of personal property, once again, just leave that blank. We're not messing around with that. Then we move on to acquisition price. Okay, so this is going to be the purchase price of the property, and once again, we're typically separating out the purchase price from the actual additional acquisition cost. Okay. So in this particular case, just to keep it simple, we're going to say $1 million. We're actually, well, we probably want to do more like 10 million, given we've got 100 units. Okay. So enough zeros in there. Okay, so 10 million divided by 100. Yeah, $100,000 a unit. That's good and cheap. Okay. All right. So acquisition cost, we've got a couple of options here. Okay, we can either do it as a percentage of the acquisition price, or we can do it as an actual dollar amount. I'm going to do it as a percentage of the acquisition price. And so here, what are we going to be using? What is this going to entail? It's going to entail probably any sort of transfer fees, any sort of brokerage fees, title insurance, whatever else that may be included in terms of acquiring the property. So here, I'm just going to pop in, let's say, 7%. Okay? All right? Now, that jumps us down to the income information. All right? Now, the income information, here we're going to start with the potential rental income, or as we tend to refer to, a potential gross income. And we've got a couple of options here. All right? In this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to say year one per square foot or per unit, subject to annual percentage changes. Okay? So we're gonna say that for this property, let's say $15 a square foot. Good.
That's what I'm still looking
All right, so $15 per unit. $15 per, was it, I'm sorry. Year one per square foot or per unit? I'm sorry, no, actually we need to do it differently. I'm thinking of per square foot per year. All right, so we actually need to do $15 times, let's say, 100 units. Let me put it this way. Actually, let's do it. Say, times 12. This. Okay, let's do, actually let's do it this way. It's probably gonna be easier to do it this way. Okay. Year one total amount in annual percentage changes. All right. So in this case, we've got 100 units. And we're going to charge, let's say, $1,000 a month, okay, times 12 months would be $12,000 a year per unit. So times 100 units. $1.2 million of total potential rental income. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so let's just double check here. Year one total amount, 1, 2. I'm trying to remember now. If we put it in that way, I'm going to double check something here on the cash flows. Yep, okay, it is showing it up, it's just 1.2 million.
Why
Okay.
isn't there somewhere we can put the $1,000 in self-calculate?
I think we can, let me just double check here. Let's try it this way. We put it in as 12,000. Cash flows. Yep, you can do it that way as well. Okay, if you put it in as year one per square foot or per unit, and you put it in as 12,000, then it will go ahead and do the calculation of taking into account the number of units you've got of the 100 units. Okay? So either way, you put it in. All right, so 12,000 would be the per unit. Okay? Now, subsequent to that, you can then say, all right, what sort of annual percentage change do you want in that rent? And so let's just go with 2%. And then what it's going to do is it's going to raise the rent each subsequent year by 2%. So now if you want to sort of check and see what has been done, go back down here to your cash flows tab. Okay? And what it will show in this particular case, well, we're going to put in a little bit more information, but it's going to show your 1.2 million as your potential rental income, okay, for that first year. Now, to show the subsequent years, we're going to put in a little bit more information for it to do those additional calculations, but we'll get there in a minute. Okay, everybody good at this point? Okay, Winston, you have a computer?
Yeah, I put in the car, do commencement. Do you see the amount of traffic coming into school today?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I can go back to my car and get it. It's be a good 10 minutes there and back.
No, sorry.
I have it on my phone, but it doesn't really work that well.
I don't have it, so.
Don't worry
What's that?
Oh, here.
Were you able to enable macro?
Yeah, now.
I got 16, so how do you do it?
We are 15. No, it was saying that it was in like protected view, so I had to like take it off. It's not gonna put this. I got this. 100.
Yeah, if I can pull it up in this way. Okay, all right, so moving on
Do
from
we need it
here,
for the test today, or?
8:45.
No, will we need this information that we're doing?
No,
here?
this is for the next one. Okay, so here, other income, once again, you've got a couple of choices. Either you can enter in the year one total amount and annual percentage changes, or an amount for each year. So in this case, we're gonna go ahead and enter the year one total amount and annual percentage changes. And this is going to be, once again, on a per unit charge. Okay, so let's just say that for a year, you're gonna have an additional $1,000 per unit of other income. All right, so we just pop in 1,000, and we're gonna say that is gonna grow at 0%, so we just leave it blank. Okay. Now then the vacancy rate. Okay, so once again here, this is simply gonna be a percentage of the potential rental income, and we'll just say 15%. Okay, and we can change that from year to year if we choose to. If we put in the 15% for the first year, if you want to change it for subsequent years, all you got to do is just go in and change it depending on what your assumptions are.
The other income, you said that's $1,000 per unit?
Per unit per year.
So on cash flows, that should equate to 100,000?
No, it shouldn't have, well, yeah.
Well, it didn't do that on mine, so.
Okay, hold on, let's see.
You have 1,000.
Okay, so it's only looking at it then, it should be per unit. Oh, I see why, okay. So it is just looking at it as a total amount. Okay, so let's pop in 100,000. All right, and then operating expenses, okay, we've got some choices here. All right, we can either do it as a percentage of the gross operating income, a year one total amount, or per unit amount with annual percentage changes, so let's just do that. And we will say that is going to be $3,000 per unit with an annual percentage change of 1%. Okay, let's look back at our cash flows here for a second, see what it's done. So yeah, we've got total operating expenses of $300,000, okay? All right, now we can begin to put in some of the specific information about the mortgage on the property. All right, in this particular program, you can have up to 2 different mortgages, so sort of a first mortgage and a second mortgage. But you only have to use, you don't have to use either of them, but you can use one or you can use 2. All right, so in this case, the loan amount, you've got a couple of choices. Again, you can either do it as a loan to purchase price ratio or an actual dollar amount. So we're going to do it as a loan to purchase price ratio. And so for this first mortgage, we're going to say 75%. Okay, and then the interest rate, we'll just say 5%. Amortization period in years, we'll say 25 years. The loan term, we'll say 5 years.
Whatever the date's for 20?
25. Okay, and the loan term, the actual term of the loan itself is going to be 5 years. You remember the difference between the loan amortization and the loan term. The loan amortization is what you calculate the payments on, but the loan term is actually how long the loan is physically for, then you're gonna have a balloon payment at the end of that 5 years for the remaining, basically, in this case, 20 years. Okay? Payments per year, this is almost always gonna be 12. Okay, so 12 payments per year. And then loan cost, we're gonna do as a percentage of loan amount, and this is gonna be things like loan origination fees, discount points, that sort of thing. So in this case, we're just gonna say 4%. Okay? Now we get into the stuff that we have ignored up to this point in terms of other classes. And last week, we talked about the 3 different sort of tax rates that you may have applied to an investment. We have an ordinary income marginal tax rate, we have a capital gains tax rate, and we have a cost recovery recapture tax rate, okay? So for the purposes of this analysis, let's use 28% for our marginal tax rate, 15% for our capital gains tax rate, and 25% for the cost recovery tax rate. And those are the rates that we pretty much, I think, gave to you last term. Yep.
For the capital gains, you didn't, watching through the videos, you didn't specifically say short-term is X, long-term is Y. Is short-term 2 years and less, and long-term 2 years and more?
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much, or is that what?
There are qualifications there, but as a general rule, anything longer than 2 years.
25 and 15.
Yep. Okay. All right, so the anticipated holding period, this is what is going to determine the actual analysis that's going to show up on the actual spreadsheet in terms of how many years it forecasts. And so we've been doing everything based on 5 years, so we're just going to put in 5 here. And once you do that, that one singular thing, if you now go to the cash flows page, you see now the first 5 years have been populated fully, and then the 6th year has been populated down to net operating income. Now, if you're really paying attention, why is it giving you the net operating income on year 6?
So you can get your going out calculating your costs or your sales.
Absolutely. So you can basically calculate your reversion value based on that 6th year net operating income. Okay?
Professor, I got a little backtrack on the 14 and 17, the potential rental incomes. What you put in there? Could we just put them, oh, and we put a percentage? Perfect.
Okay? All right. So now, down at the very bottom of the inputs, the last 2 little pieces. Disposition price and disposition cost of sale. Disposition price, this is another term for it would be reversion value, okay? So the disposition price, however, you can calculate it using 3 methods. Using the cap rate, which is what we have been using up to this point, or you can base it off of an annual growth rate of how much the property has gone, or you're projecting it to go up in value over that 5-year period, or just an actual dollar amount because you've got a contract in hand from somebody for the end of that 5 years for a specific price. But most of the time, we're going to go with cap rate. Okay, and then we would simply pop in what is that cap rate. So let's just say we go with a cap rate of, I don't know, 7%. Pulling that out of the air. Okay? Now, the disposition cost of the sale, you've got a couple of different options here. Percentage of the disposition price or an actual dollar amount. I'm going to do percentage of the disposition price, and here I'm going to say it's going to cost us about maybe 8% to liquidate everything and be done with it. Okay, so if you've matched up with all of my inputs at this point, you should be able to go down here now to the cash flow piece, and you should match up with everything here. So let's just sort of take a look at kind of what we've got going on. Yep, what's
I
it?
got one problem. One, in my total operating expenses year 1, and they let me put in a number longer than 7%.
Okay.
Yeah, mine's.
Let's go back over, look at the input sheet, and let's look specifically operating expenses. What I put in was the year 1 per square foot or per unit and annual percent changes. Make sure you're using that one. And once you select that, then you put in 3,000 per unit, and then 1% thereafter.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now going back to the cash flows. So take a look at what I've got up on the screen relative to what you've got on your screen. Let me blow it up just a little bit so maybe you can see it a little bit better. Okay. So let's just sort of start over here, kind of on the far right, up at the top. Acquisition price was $10 million. Acquisition cost, $700,000. $300,000 for loan cost, minus our mortgages of $7.5 million, equals our initial investment of $3.5 million. So that initial investment is what we have typically, up to this point, we've just been, sort of throwing out there with reckless abandon of just simply saying $3,500 of equity. Okay? This is more precise because it's obviously taking into consideration other bits and pieces of information instead of just sort of throwing out that number of, okay, here's our equity, this is really what our initial investment is, okay? Make sense? Okay, come over here to our mortgage. Okay, once again, we've only got a first mortgage, $7.5 million, 5% interest rate, 25-year term, 25-year amortization period, 5-year term, 12 monthly payments. Your monthly payment is the $43,844. Your annual debt service is $526,131. Loan fees and cost of $300,000. Okay, hopefully everybody matches up to that. Now, this is where we start to get into some of the tax-related information that we covered last week. Cost recovery data. It has the value of our improvements as $8,560,000. Okay, now where are they coming up with that number from? All right, well, if you remember, our acquisition price was $10 million. So let's just kind of work through this real quickly. Okay, so our acquisition price was $10 million. But for the purposes of the IRS, they're going to allow us to throw in that $700,000 of acquisition cost. Okay?
So how much of it is land and how much of it is your building? It was 80%.
Right. So we've got $10 million, $700,000, and then we said, what is our allocation between land versus improvements? Well, if we go back over and we look at this, we said 20% was the land value, 80% was the improvements value. So we get $8,560,000 as our initial depreciable tax basis. Okay, so if you look back here at the cash flows, what number are they populating here with that value? 8,560,000. Okay, does everybody see that? Okay, now with that, we're applying the straight line cost recovery method, all right, which is simply to say you're taking whatever that amount is, dividing it by 27.5 years to come up with what the depreciable value or the depreciable amount is going to be for each year. Now here, we can also make some adjustments as to when the property was placed into service, whether it was placed into service January the 1st or some other month. And if you remember from our discussions last week, that timing makes a difference because of what?
The half month thing.
Mid-month convention, okay? So what that means, if you remember from what I was telling you last time,
You get half a month.
even though this property is placed into service on January the 1st, you're only going to get how many months of depreciation that first year?
Half.
You're going to get 11.5 months, okay? So that means if we probably scroll down a little bit, you're going to probably notice that the depreciation charge for the first year is a little bit less than the subsequent years, and the whole reason for that is because of that mid-month convention. So let's just scroll down, see if I'm telling you the truth. Okay? And yes, I am. Okay, line number 10, cost recovery for improvements. You see that for the first year it's 298,316, but then every subsequent year is 311,242. The reason for that is because of that mid-month convention for that first year. Now the question is, all right, how will we calculate that? All right, well, let's take a look. All right, if this is our depreciable value for the property, okay, improvements value, if we take and we divide that by 27.5, let's see what we get.
311.
You get 311,272.72. Okay, so that matches up, obviously, with this number here. Yes?
Yeah.
Everybody see that?
It's off by a couple bucks, Carl.
And once again, just do the rounding. Okay?
That's a big time rounding.
Well, it's due to rounding. Just leave it at that. Okay? Because what they're actually doing is they are applying a percentage instead of doing, our way is actually more precise than what their way is. Because they're doing it based upon a percentage per month. And they're rounding off at like the third decimal place. Okay. So this is the annual amount.
Oh.
So to get,
And I'm taking into account the points amortization that you're talking about?
that's separate.
Oh, okay.
Okay? All right, so this, if we take and we multiply by 11.5 divided by 12, we should then match up and we should get, in this case, 298,303.03, okay? And so they get 298,316, and once again, the reason for that is rounding. Now, you're saying, okay, well, let me prove that I'm not lying to you about the rounding. Use this percentage that they've got here, okay? If you take the 8,560,000 and you multiply that by 0.03636, you get 311,241.60. Okay, so I am not lying to you. My way is more precise than what they're actually using there. Okay, and the reason they do it that way and they have it up there that way is it's just it's in your mind, it's a way of sort of saying that for each year you're getting to write down for each year beyond the first year about 3.6% of the property, the improvements value each year is what you're basically getting to depreciate. So you're saying that in essence the improvements are losing 3.6 of their value each and every year. So they're just expressing it as a percentage.
How do they get the percentage?
Right.
You go like 27.5,
Right.
What's that?
you take 27.5% and divide it into the,
Oh.
Okay, 27.5, and then you've got, in this case, let's see here. Okay. So 1 divided by 27.5 is 0.0363636. So you're saying the whole is 1, and then divided by 27.5 would give you the 3636 per year. Okay? Okay. All right, moving forward. Let's see. All right, so,
My, gross operating income is off.
well, once again, that's gonna be more than likely because make sure that your other, how much is your other income? Okay, go back and change that to 100,000. Okay, all right, so you should be matching up with everything there at this point. So we scroll on down. Okay, now, once again, you should understand everything down to line 7 of net operating income. Okay? Then, what it asks you to do, which we talked about last week, which was that you need to subtract out the interest for your first mortgage. Okay? So where do we come up with that number?
Amortized equal.
Oh, because it's the taxable, okay.
Okay, what is our loan amount?
7.5 million.
Okay? The loan amount of 7.5 million, so that's going to be our present value. 12 payments per year. Our interest rate was what, 5%?
5%.
Our loan amortization period is what, 25 years?
Correct.
So we're going to solve, get our monthly payment first. Okay. Our monthly payment, $43,844.25. Okay, now just to see, let's go back up here for a second. One of the things that it gives you, if you look right here, periodic payment, it actually gives you that number, $43,844.25. Okay, so that number matches up. We've just done it by hand, okay, or at least on the calculator. Now, but that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is how much interest expense is going to be for that first year. So we've got to use the amortization function. So you would do 1, input 12, shift, amortize, and then equal, equal, equal. Okay? So the first number we get is 154,643. That is our principal. Okay? We hit equal again. This is the number we're searching for, which is our interest of 371,488.02. And if we want to continue, we can go to equal again, and this is simply telling us our balance at the end of that first year is 7,345,356.9899 is our balance. But the number that we are searching for is this interest portion. Everybody with me? Okay, now, does that number match up with what we have over here?
Close.
Okay, so we've got the interest on the first mortgage, 371,487. Okay, once again, it is due to rounding. If you need me to go through and prove it, I will, but it is due to rounding. Okay, our answer is more precise. Now, as a result of that, now one of the things that you should take note of, okay, what is happening to that interest expense for the subsequent years?
Decreasing.
It's decreasing. Why is it decreasing? Because you've paid down more and more of the loan, therefore the interest expense is going to be less and less as you progress through the loan. So in order to get that year two number, you've got to then go in and you've got to calculate the interest expense for the second year. Now this is where I will tell whether or not you have paid attention up to this point. What are we going to put in as our inputs?
13
Well,
input.
Yes,
4.
13, not 12. 13 because 13 is January of the subsequent year. 12 would be December of the current year. So 13 input, 24 shift, amortize, equal, 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 and we're only searching for the second one to get what is our interest. 13 input, 24 shift, amortize, equal, equal, and you should get 363, 576, 19. Okay, so let's go over here, just double check. 363, 576. Okay, everybody with me? Okay, and then the next year would be what? 25 input 36. The next year would be 37 input 48. The next year would be 49 input 60. Okay, everybody cool on that? Yes, no, possibly could be. All right, now we also, as we said, we showed how to calculate the cost recovery. All right, so if we had had, just to back up just for a second, if we had had a second mortgage, that would have been where we would have subtracted out the interest for the second mortgage on that line, but since we don't have one, nothing there. The cost recovery, we've already talked about how we got that number, okay? Personal property, we don't have anything there, so we're not gonna mess with that. Now, loan cost amortization. We talked about this last week, okay? That with your loan cost, you get to amortize, or you're forced to amortize those over the life of the loan, okay? So in this case, go back up, calculate what were our total loan costs on this property. All right, $300,000. Okay, of total loan costs. Now, how many years is our loan?
5.
No,
25.
25. Or at least in terms of, okay, let's go back down here for a second. All right,
25 years.
so loan amortization period, in this case, we are doing this, we've got $60,000, so they are doing it, yeah, okay, so you're doing it actually over the holding period of the asset in this case. So over the 5-year term of the loan, okay, not the amortization period. So 300,000 divided by 5-year term of the loan would be then the $60,000 per year for the amortization of the loan points or fees. Okay, so that's that line item. All right, all of that subtracted gives us our real estate taxable income, which obviously is going to vary a little bit per year, depending on all the above assumptions. And then we simply are going to apply our tax liability or our marginal tax rate at 28%. So that gives us basically the dollar amount there running across on line 16. Then we jump back down to kind of some of the vernacular that we have been accustomed to, and we take a look at our net operating income, subtract out our annual debt service, which is the total principal and interest payments, okay? Then that is going to give us our cash flow or before tax cash flow of the $293,869, and then the only piece of new information, if you will, to this is now we're going to take that tax liability for that year, subtract it out from the cash flow before taxes, and that will give us our cash flow after taxes. Okay, make sense? Okay, so that gets us through what we need to get through for today. Okay, does everybody understand what we have done? Any questions on that? So what I would suggest you do is you go back and you sort of play around with this a little bit more and kind of get comfortable with it. Now, one of the things that we're going to do in one of the subsequent classes is we're going to go a few steps further in terms of looking at the actual sale of the asset and the tax liabilities applied to the recaptured depreciation and to the capital gains and that sort of thing, okay? But right now, this gets us through at least the income piece, okay? Steve, do you have a question?
Yeah, line 16 and 23, just kinda lost me, I'm sorry, I wasn't really paying.
Okay, so the taxable income of 90,000, 197, we're gonna be applying the 28% marginal tax rate to that. That should give you 25,255.16, which will match up here. Okay? Then that number, you're then gonna just pop down here as your tax liability to subtract from your before tax cash flow to get your after tax cash flow.
Oh, so it's not doing anything up there on the.
Correct.
Got you, okay. Alright.
As I said last week, think of it as like a subroutine, okay, that you've got to do. This whole set of calculations, basically from line 7 to line 16, is strictly a income tax subroutine, okay? The only reason for doing those calculations from there to there is just to get that one singular number that you pop in down here as your tax liability. Okay? Make sense? Okay, any other questions on this before we do the test one? Okay. Okay, once again, for test one, only your calculator, pen or pencil, no book, no notes, no computer.